Next up, a really important thing to keep in mind with any image you make is the setting, the background, or the atmosphere. Now, this is a pretty broad category. Setting is a very broad word that can mean a lot of things, but think of where your compositions are actually existing in space. Is it at the beach? Is it indoors? Is it in a studio setting? Or is it something completely different, like a solid white background or a blurred background? So these 4 images I generated separately using a prompt that just said tiger head illustration, comma, and then 4 different backgrounds. So this one was tiger head illustration, cityscape background, tiger head illustration, jungle background, tiger head illustration, purple paisley background. I really like that one. And then tiger head illustration, solid yellow background. So these are very different, of course, right? It adds a lot of flavor to the images, but it also can be very useful, I'll show in the next video, to use the keywords white background or black background, where you can then use Photoshop to isolate the subject of your image. If you want something like this right here, Midjourney can't generate an image that has transparent backgrounds currently, and it can't match this color very easily. So what I did is I just told it to generate a white background for this image, and then I deleted the background using Photoshop or Canva or many tools that are out there that will help you do it, even if you have no idea how to use Photoshop. Anyway, we'll come back to that. So let's play around with some of this stuff. Again, pretty self-explanatory. What I will say is when you start introducing colors, like we've already seen before, we had a whole lecture on colors, you have to be careful to try and get, if you only want a yellow background, for example, this tiger, the whole tiger is kind of yellow. So you may need to play around with your colors and say, orange tiger, yellow background. If you just put the word yellow in there, you may end up with a yellow tiger. It's not amazing at understanding the relationship between color and subjects unless you explicitly put those words next to each other. So we've been doing a lot of animals, flowers. What else exists in this world? How about an inanimate object? How about a mug? Sure, I'm looking at my coffee mug right now. So let's do imagine. Coffee mug. Let's call it a cute coffee mug. Go away. And that's all that I'll say. Maybe an illustration. And then I'll say solid white background. Next up, let's do a blurred background and just see where how about cafe background? And then finally, let's do cute coffee mug illustration. Let's do autumn leaves background. And let's see how this goes. I'll be back when this finishes. Okay, so the first one finished up. Coffee mug illustration, solid white background. There we are, although this one's not exactly solid white. But this is the sort of thing that's very easy to change in Photoshop. We can isolate the actual subject and then change the background color as we please. That's generally easier to do than trying to tell Midjourney that you want the exact shade of purple that your company uses as the background. Then we have our cute coffee mug illustration, blurred cafe background. And this is, again, one of those things where it worked. We got the blurred background of a cafe. However, it also influenced the mug itself. And this is kind of what I was alluding to when I said it doesn't always understand the difference. It doesn't understand English very well. And the difference between saying you want a cafe background versus just including the word cafe and it sees the word mug, and now it's made us a mug with a cafe illustration on it. So we need to go back if we want a white mug and try being more specific. But it did give us the background. But this is sort of the game you play where we want a cute white, maybe solid white coffee mug, blurred cafe background. Okay, so that one finished up, and this is a lot closer to what I had in mind, where it's a cute solid white coffee mug illustration, but it's in front of a blurred cafe background, you can see this one still has a cafe on it, but these two are close, and this one's also a cute, I said cute mug, which maybe I didn't need to say, compared to here where this one's actually pretty good. That's a cute mug too, but 3 of the 4 images it created have a cafe on the mug itself. So you just need to play around with things, and then of course you could pick one of these and then create variations and continue until you're happy with the end result. I mean, another thing is it's on a table, and I could probably totally change this up. This kind of ties into our next video on composition, but I could say something like floating in the air, or centered floating, something like that, so if I don't want it to be on a surface. Additionally, my background of autumn leaves one, the first attempt only went okay. As you can see here, this one is a cute mug illustration with autumn leaves in the background, but these have, well, at least this one and this one, 1 and 4, have leaves on the cup. It's the same problem. So I reran it as solid white coffee mug on background of autumn leaves, and this is much closer. I also got rid of illustration, which I didn't actually mean to do, but that's why the style is completely different, right? These are all illustrations. This is more of a product photo looking thing. It's quite a bland mug, but it does work, right? And it's on a background of autumn leaves. Okay, let's do one more. I'll just use the floating keyword. Well, it's not a keyword, but I'll use floating. So cute. Let's just do solid white mug. I'll get rid of illustration too. Floating on blurred cafe background. And we'll see how that affects the end result. Maybe I don't want it on a surface. I just want it hovering in midair. Okay, so the floating example finished. It didn't exactly work the way I wanted it to, right? It's still on a surface. So I reran it again, this time trying floating in air, and that kind of worked on this one. It is in the air, but what I really don't want is the table in there. So I used a final prompt with the no parameter, -- no table, surface, or counter. And this is getting me closer to what I want. It's not quite done yet, but this one, and this one are just floating in midair. Although I've now introduced balloons, so maybe I need to add -- no balloons. It's always a constant battle. Well, I shouldn't say battle. It's a constant iterative process of writing prompts. Next, we'll talk about perspective and composition. So these are some of the most important things to consider when you're writing a prompt, unless you want to be completely surprised by what the model comes up with. It really helps if you have an image in mind you're trying to recreate or have the model get close to. Think about what the image actually looks like in terms of the composition. If you were a camera, and you don't have to know much about working with cameras, but it helps to understand the difference between, a telephoto zoom lens versus a very wide angle versus a fisheye lens versus a bird's eye view, a high angle, low angle, close up, all these different options. It helps to understand what those look like and then include those in your prompts. You can end up with radically different results of the same subjects, the same colors, the same moods, all the other words the same, but you can change the composition drastically. These are kind of separate concepts too. Perspective versus composition could be a broader topic that refers to, where are things in the actual image? Is it in the top left corner? Is there a person, looking to the left and another person looking to the right? Those would all be part of the composition. But what I'm referring to here is more about the invisible camera that's capturing our image. Even if it's an illustration, is it a wide angle drawing? Is it a bird's eye view drawing? Is it a first person perspective in an aircraft? There's a million things that we can try. So let's start with what should we do? Let's do a child walking through Kyoto, and let's do nighttime, or maybe nighttime is fine. And then I'll just go with a couple of different possibilities here. Let's do a wide angle. And then let's do telephoto or close-up. And let's also do an ultra wide. Okay, while that's going, let's go back to this reference that I've shown a couple of times. There's a page on this Midjourney styles and keywords reference called perspective. And this shows a bunch of different examples. Again, it kind of is overkill or super specific sometimes, but we have things like a top view, a side view, a satellite view, close-up view, extreme close-up. I assume macro is somewhere in here, maybe. Wide shot, epic wide shots, selfies, centered shots, first-person view, third person, low angle, high angle. Let's see how this is going. So here's our wide angle. That looks good to me. These are cool images of a kid walking through Kyoto at night. So wide angle lenses, are going to show you a lot more of the world captured in frame. They can distort things. They can make people look smaller. They can make things in the distance look much smaller. So here's our close-up. And this is definitely tighter if you compare the two. Right, so this is much wider, although it's still not that close up. If we really wanted it to be of the boy, we would say something like portrait of child walking through Kyoto, centered on face or something like that. Now, let's try a few more examples. Let's do the same thing. So child walking through Kyoto, but this time I'll say high angle. And then after that, I'll do a low angle. So this is where the camera is positioned. If it's low on the ground looking up, if it's high above looking down, and then let's also do a bird's eye view. So very different, basically top down. Returning to this reference, there's a whole section on perspectives. One that is kind of trendy and you'll see a lot is using isometric. So I believe isometric refers to, I think it's a 45-degree angle. I'm not exactly sure, but it's a set angle that a composition is, or a camera sort of looking down on something from. And it's used a lot in video games and in sort of trendy design language for websites. So you can use the isometric keyword, and you'll end up with something like this, or like this here. I used isometric to make this. And then again, there's a lot of very specific things in here. If we keep going down where we have, 2-point perspective, 3-point perspective, linear or curvilinear perspectives, and then things like cross-section, exploded view, cutaway view. I really like doing these. These are fun. You can generate some really cool images. I don't know if I would call that a perspective. It's more of just a composition or even a style, but I'm grouping it all together. Here's our low angle where the camera is close to the ground. You can see, like, especially this one here or this one here, the camera is low, and that's low angle. Here's high angle where the camera is up higher, looking down, although it's not quite as extreme as a bird's eye view like we have here, which just generally is going to be higher up. And then we will eventually have our top-down view, which should be a more extreme view looking down. And let's play around with a few more. Let's do, instead of a child walking through Kyoto, let's do a piece of pizza. Sure. Let's do slice of pizza, and let's do a macro photo. So a macro lens allows you to get really close to your subject, and way closer than you can normally get, and still focus on the image. So we're doing a macro image of a slice of pizza. We'll do a separate video on product photography and different ideas and things you can do to try and get better product photos. Not of your products, but just sort of placeholder things that you can use all over the place in marketing and on your own website and just at sort of e-commerce world. So here's our top-down view. So more extreme. It's still not exactly, straight 90 degrees down, but it is a top-down view. And while the pizza one is going, let's finish up with one more example. Now, let's just play around with first person and third person. So here's the macro pizza, by the way, a close shot of a piece of pizza. But you can even do, a macro photo of a bug or something that's really small that you normally wouldn't be able to capture very well with a typical camera lens. So maybe a bee on flower macro photo. Okay, so we'll end with a few examples of first person and third person. Let's do first person view out submarine coral reef. And then we also have keywords like centered, right? You could use that if you want to get something centered in an image. So here's our first person view coming into reality here, where we've got the perspective from somebody looking out a submarine towards a coral reef. Here's our macro photography of a bee on a flower, right, pollinating it. So this is a typical macro look where you get extreme blurred in the background because of the focal length, and I don't really know a whole lot about it, but you get extreme blurred and then really high clarity on tiny little details. Finally, here's an example of trying to get something centered in the image. So Midjourney often will center things by default. It tends to heavily favor centered compositions, but if it's not centering something and you want it definitely to be centered, you can use the centered keyword, right? Center, centered, that sort of thing, portrait centered, and it can make a big impact. Now in the next video, I'll talk a bit about the challenges involved in moving things around. It is very difficult to describe having a composition where you want something on the left or on the right or on the top because of its tendency to center things. And that's what we'll learn about next. Okay, in this video, I want to talk about changing compositions and trying to move things around, which is not easy to do in Midjourney. So my goal here, I want to have a bee. I want it on the left side of the image and then blue sky on the right side. So of course, saying bee flying centered is not going to help me. But if I try things like bee flying on the left, blue sky background, it doesn't really help. It looks like it's maybe controlling the fact that it's flying from the left, it's looking to the right, maybe, because 3 of these images are facing to the right. You could try bee flying left side of image. Nope, didn't work. Here's another one. Left side composition. This did some weird stuff. I got a whole bunch of little split view images. A bee flying from the left side with lots of negative space on the right side. No, didn't really work either. Bee flies alone isolated on the left side of the image. Blue sky background. Also doesn't work. There's countless Reddit threads, people asking about, I have a character I've generated, it's a lot of anime characters. I've generated one and it keeps being centered. How do I move it to the left or to the right? It's just not easy to do. However, the best strategy to do these days with Midjourney 5.2 and later is to find an image that you like. Let's say that I like this one here. I think I like that one. Yeah, let's go with that one. Actually, you know what? I kind of like this one too. Maybe this one. I want it flying from the left to the right. So I'm going to upscale this one. So this is 1, 2, 3. And once it upscales, I'll use the zoom features that we learned about a little while ago. And I'll zoom out. Let's do a 2 times zoom out. And we hope that it doesn't introduce a whole bunch of different elements into the composition because the prompt was very specific. Blue sky background, negative space. So let's hope that it gives us just more blue. And then what I can do is crop the image after the fact. So I won't do that using Midjourney. It involves, a tiny bit of photo editing, but this is the best strategy to try and move something around, at least with the way Midjourney currently works. It is not good at understanding specifics of a composition. But we can guide it, we can find an image, we can zoom out, and then we can crop. And we can become the composer of the image using zoom. And so this is going to work great. I mean, of course, we'll lose quality by cropping, and that's always a problem here. But this is currently the best approach to this problem. So when this finishes, if I'm happy with it, you can see, of course, it still keeps everything centered. Okay, so these all will work. Let's pick one of them. I don't know. Maybe this one here. So I'll upscale 2. I'll download it. Okay, so I've uploaded my image to Canva. And you can use anything, right? You can do this in Photoshop, Preview, really any application. And then I'll just crop it to the composition that I like. So if I want to keep it, well, I'm not keeping it a square, but here we are. I've got my bee on the left side, and then I've got a lot of negative space on the right. And if I knew I wanted this aspect ratio, I could also have used the -AR aspect ratio parameter, although it still will often keep things centered no matter what the aspect ratio is. So there we go. That's just one example of how you can use this approach. Zoom out from a composition you like and then recrop, and you can try and move things around that way. But it is one of the hardest things to do in Midjourney, along with text, which is a whole separate topic that we'll cover shortly. Another strategy that's really useful that I've already mentioned at least once has to do with setting a solid background color so that we can isolate using Photoshop or Canva or any photo editing tool. We can isolate the subject and remove the background. So it's basically a way of not having a background, but we start by telling Midjourney that we want it to create a solid white or solid black or solid something background. We want to color that contrast with our subject. So a lot of photo editing tools could easily remove this B, if that's what I was trying to do, from the background and separate it out. But it often is easier to do a solid color. So let's try an example. Let's do let's do something kind of fantastical, a cyberpunk orchid. Okay, so while that's going, we can clearly see the background has all sorts of stuff going on. And if I want to just isolate this orchid somehow, the easiest option is to rerun this prompt and pick a color that contrasts with the subject. So, don't pick a pink background, but in this case, I would probably go with just a black or white background. So imagine, if I can spell it, solid white background. I like to put the solid keyword in there so it doesn't try and do like a gradient or some blurred white photographic background. Although most of the time, a lot of photo editing tools are really smart today, especially now that a lot of them have access to some very fancy AI models where they can easily find edges and identify subjects. I'll let this go and be back when it finishes. Okay, so that finished. Let's pick one that we like. I like this. I think I like this one the best. So I'm going to upscale that one. That's 3. And I don't really care to make variations. Let's say I'm happy with that. So then I will go to the web, save the image. I wish there was a save button right here instead of having to go to web first. Okay, so I download that. Now I'll go back to Canva. And I'm going to use Canva just because it's free, everyone has access to it, and you don't have to know how to use Photoshop. Photoshop is definitely better if you have some complex things you need to separate from a background, but I'm going to upload my image. I'll just make a new slide that I can work against. I'll add in this image. Okay, let's make it a bit larger. Whoops, not like that. And then if I go to Edit Photo, I can click on BG Remover. It's just a single click, and it tends to do pretty well. I mean, take a look. I've already isolated this. That was it. Now you can go back in and edit specific parts using the background remover, where I can restore some stuff. I can custom, what do I call this? I can erase things. I'm not going to do that though. Oh no, it doesn't let me undo. So I guess I'll have to paint that back in. And that just makes it super easy to isolate an asset. And then I could use this. I think it would look better on, a different background color. Yeah, maybe something like that. I'd probably get rid of this little bit down there. But this is the best strategy if you're trying to isolate an asset. And it also tends to work better with more illustrative assets rather than this sort of photographic looking thing, because we get these harsh edges and the lighting. It doesn't quite look realistic. Still looks fine. But if you look at some of the other things that I've done this with, here's this isometric bookshop, this moody sculpture, this time machine, this collection of colors, this cartoon of Salvador Dali, this vector drawing of a cat in a spotlight. This is called a knolling. We'll talk about that as a fun little, just a cool type of composition that most people don't know even has a name, but it's called a knolling. It's a collection of elements sort of spread across a surface. Anyway, all of these had a white background or a solid color background that I then removed using Canva. Okay. Next, I'd like to talk about some tips and ideas to generate photorealistic images. This is not an example of something I would call photorealistic. This is a little cartoony, sort of over the top, too beautiful maybe. The lighting feels artificial, and this is a result of some of just the default styles that we get from Midjourney. Now, it's still a nice image. It's a portrait photo of a woman knitting on the subway. That's the prompt that I gave it. Here's the same prompt. Another kind of similar image where it's super beautiful, lovely lighting, but it's almost like glowing, and it feels just like too polished and like a 3D render, I would say. And finally, one more example of the same thing. This one's not as extreme, but if you look at her face, it doesn't quite look like, it's pretty photographic, but it doesn't exactly look real. So this happens a lot. This is a simple prompt. It just says portrait photo. But there are some specific things that we can do to try and steer the model in the direction that we want. And one of those really common strategies to make something photorealistic is to include keywords like large format or medium format photo, or even specific camera names. So take a look at the difference here. Same prompt, portrait photo of a woman knitting on the subway, but then I add on shot on medium format, and then a couple of very fancy cameras. Phase 1 IQ 180, very fancy, I think it's actually a large format camera, but a very fancy camera. And then Hasselblad, also fancy, expensive camera. It's unclear if it makes a huge difference which camera you pick. Other people will say like Canon 5D or Fuji GFX. There's a million cameras out there, and it will make a difference absolutely if you pick an old school camera and you put a type of film in there, for example, Portra or something. That will make a difference. But with these modern cameras, it's not super clear if it makes a big difference which one you pick. But compare no camera. Right, we didn't say medium format or large format. We didn't say Hasselblad. It looks like something from, I don't know, like video game art maybe. Beautiful, but over the top. And then we get something way more realistic when we say medium format or shot on medium format, phase 1. Here's another example from the same grid. This looks way more like a photo in my opinion. Same as this one here. We've got the harsher, more realistic lighting from a subway. It just feels more like a photo is what I would say. It's not perfect, but you could then work with one of these, upscale it, generate variations. If you're going for a very photographic look, it's my experience that it makes a pretty significant difference if you at least mention 1 or 2 cameras in there. Now, this is also something that I've added on here where I did style raw. And this can be useful to get a more photographic look. We talked about this when we covered the -- style parameter. It strips away some of Midjourney's built-in styles, and it's useful specifically when you're trying to get a more photographic look. Same thing here. So this is an example, same prompt, portrait photo of woman knitting on the subway. I still have the camera stuff in there, and then also style raw. I couldn't tell a massive difference between leaving style raw off with still including the camera data or the camera part of the prompt versus the camera plus style raw. But generally, if you are going for a photographic look, it's useful to remove those default styles. So let's try this ourselves. Let's come up with a photo that we want. Okay, so let's try creating some of these images ourselves. Let's go for a very photorealistic, let's go with a photo of red-haired boy looking out window at night. And yeah, I think that should be good. Let's just start without any of our sort of photo keywords. Large format, Hasselblad, won't even describe the lighting or the angle, and we'll just go with the default regular Midjourney model styles, so not style raw. And maybe just for a better comparison, I'll run this twice. I'll be back when that finishes. Okay, so those finished up. I went ahead and upscaled a couple of them just to show, the non-photo realistic portions. I like the composition, reflection's good, I like the lighting, but again, this looks slightly fake, slightly over the top, and not quite realistic. Same thing with this one. It's very nice, but it kind of, also this reflection looks, maybe I'm wrong, it looks like a different person. But it also is just video game-esque. It's very good, but still not quite photorealistic. So let's try running the same prompt. Well, not the same prompt. Let's try running the prompt and tweaking it slightly to be a photo of red-haired boy looking out window at night, shot on large format Hasselblad. And we can put another couple cameras in here like Canon and Nikon. It's unclear if listing more of them makes much of a difference though. And then I'll also say wide angle lens. Let's try that. And I'll run that twice. And you know what? I'll also run one with style raw. And I'll be back when those finish up. All right, so most of those have finished up, and there's quite a difference, especially when I've run it a couple of times. So I actually, while I had paused the recording, I reran each prompt 2 or 3 times, just so we had a bigger sample size. And this is our first version, our first grid that includes the photography language, large format, Hasselblad, Nikon, Canon, wide-angle lens. Some of them still look like this. They look a little rendery, but like this one right here, which I blew up or I upscaled. Where are you? This one, it's not perfect, but if you look at the lighting here, it's a lot more realistic where we have some shadows, some actual even blown out portions compared to what we were getting here when we didn't use the photography language. It just feels fake. Again, I can't really put my finger on why. It's just over the top, overcooked. Here's another example. This grid here, we've got the lighting here looks far more realistic to me. Now this one, maybe those are a bit more stylized too, but I blew this one up and this looks pretty good. I don't know if I would say for sure that it's a photograph, but it looks pretty good. Then it gets even better when we add in Style Raw. So here is the first grid of Style Raw. The lighting's just much more natural. I blew this one up here. This one's pretty good in my opinion. It looks pretty realistic. The lighting looks good. It's everything's not so like hyper smoothed out. Here's another grid that I did with the same photography keywords plus Style Raw to strip away those Midjourney styles, and these all look pretty good to me. I mean, this one here, that one almost looks like a photograph. Looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is throw these together on a slide so we can see them side by side. I'll be right back. Okay, so this comparison shows some of the differences. And again, this is from running each prompt like 3 times. So I'm sure we could get some pretty bad results using Style Raw and camera language and probably get some good results without any of those add-ons. But here is my original prompt, which was red-haired boy, photo of red-haired boy looking out the window, something like that. And without any of the camera language, without Style Raw, it definitely looks fake. This is with the camera language, so shot on Hasselblad, large format, Nikon, Canon, wide-angle lens, and it certainly looks more like a photograph. The lighting is the biggest difference as we progress from left to right. And then I added Style Raw with the exact same camera language and the same original prompts, but -- Style Raw to remove some of the Midjourney styles. And this looks the most like a photograph in my opinion. It's not the most beautiful image here. I mean, I really like this one actually. It's just a cool looking image, but it still looks slightly unrealistic. This one to me is pretty hard to tell that it was made by Midjourney. Maybe I've been staring at these for too long though, so you tell me. But I think there's a clear progression here, certainly between this one and this one. Big difference. Speaking of creating photographic images using Midjourney, another tip that can help a lot is to use the name of a specific type of film. And this is one of those things like using an artist's name, like in the style of, X, Annie Leibovitz or something, where there's a lot of stuff encompassed in a single word or phrase. In the case of a film, there's a lot that goes into the look of a film, the graininess, the color range, the dynamic range, a lot of things that are kind of intangible. And if you're not a photographer, I'm certainly not, things that are hard to describe with words. But if you know the look that you like of a specific film, it can really make a pretty serious impact. So I'm going to start with a basic prompt, a street style photograph of a man with a scarf. And you know what? I might rerun this with Style Raw. Style Raw. While that's going, we'll take a look at the first draft that we get back. So it looks pretty good. Street style photograph of a man in a scarf. Of course, for some reason, they all have sort of long-ish hair blowing in the wind. Looks good. Now let's try it again, but this time we'll specify a specific type of film. And the first film that I've chosen is Fujifilm Superia 400. So here's some image examples of that. And this Wikipedia page that I was on earlier has tons and tons of different films. I tried to find like a nice reference page that showed examples of what films looked like. I couldn't really find one, unfortunately. But there are some pretty famous ones that I'll just briefly touch on. So I'm going to modify my prompt, run the same thing, but say a street style photograph of a man with a scarf, shot on, and then Fujifilm Superia 400 Style Raw. And then let's pick another film. One that I have open here is Lomography Color Negative 800. So we'll just swap out the name of the film. And then let's do one more. Pretty famous one is Velvia 50. So we'll do that. Shot on Fujichrome Velvia 50. And if any of these finished, well, here's our style raw. Again, no film has been specified. It's just sort of a modern DSLR looking shot. There's no filmic quality to it, no graininess that I can see. It's a pretty standard looking modern street photo. But if we look at what we're starting to get back here, you can see that there's a bit of a different color range or white balance going on here. So did this one finish up? Yeah. So this one was our Lomography Color Negative 800. And maybe I'll upscale this one. We'll probably be able to see a pretty significant difference in comparing them. This one is Fujifilm Superia 400. Let's pick, kind of like the top right. So that's 2. And there's definitely a filmic quality to these, where we're getting some of those colors that are natural to this specific film. We're getting some of the graininess, and it definitely looks like a photo. Now, you may not prefer this look compared to one of the, I guess you would say, cleaner, more modern images. Let's just pick the second one also. But these are looking pretty photographic. And I've found that by using a specific film name, and this is not something that I came up with, just to be clear. There's lots of people on Twitter and Reddit talking about this. But by using these film names, you can get a much more photographic look. So let's compare that to the one without a film name. It's not bad, right? It still looks photographic. I'd say maybe his face is a little bit too rendery. It doesn't quite look like a photograph, but it's also sharper, higher quality, right? More color range, I would say, compared to what we see from this example, which is Superia 400. This example, Color Negative 800, and for some reason, Velvia has not started yet. Now let's try a black and white one, because I found that these also work really well. If we take one like XP2 400, we'll rerun the same prompt again, swap this out. And then also, another famous one is definitely Portra, Kodak Portra 400. I'm not a film camera person, but that's like one of the 3 films I've heard of. And then let's go back to this Wikipedia page. Let's pick a black and white one. Oh, actually, I already have one open here. It was, the CMS 202 Pro. And I really like the look of these, really dramatic. It looks like, almost Ansel Adams-esque photography. Very contrasty, dark darks. Again, I fail to describe this sort of stuff. It's hard to try and, you can create a black and white image, but there's so many different flavors of black and white. So if this is the flavor that I want, it's much easier to use the name of the film. So we'll wrap up with that. Let's do one more here. Shot on CMS 20 Pro? 22 Pro. And here's our Portra. And I think these all look pretty good. I mean, let's pick, I don't know, which one should we take? Maybe the 4th one, the 2nd one. So just keep this comparison in mind. This is our original benchmark that had no film. And then here's one that has some film. Here's another that has some film. And yet another. So it pretty drastically changes the look of the photograph. It's still photographic looking, but it's a very different quality to it. And it's kind of hard to put that into words, especially if you're a photography noob like me. Using film is an easy way. You don't have to worry about white balance and dynamic range and understanding, contrast levels and graininess and all that stuff. Now let's take a look at, this was Velvia 50. I mean, these are all pretty good, I think. They definitely look like street photos shot on a film camera. What is unclear, I should say now, is how much the specific film name actually correlates to the resulting images. Because as you'll see here, this is the CMS 22 Pro, which maybe is not a very popular film. I just randomly picked it from Wikipedia. the images shot on it look like this. What we got here does not quite look like that at all. So there's a high chance that just including any film name will make something look more filmic, but it doesn't appear that you'll be getting the exact look from every specific film. I imagine it's just the more popular ones like Velvia and Portra. Again, if I've heard of those, those are like the 2 or 3 that I actually know, and some of these other ones are quite niche. But let's try finding another black and white, maybe more popular film. Okay, to put my theory to the test, I found 2 of the more popular black and white films just with a Google search. What are the best black and white films? And again, I'm a noob with this stuff, but it looked like Fujifilm Neopan Acros 102 film. It's very popular, and it did in fact, at the very least, make the image black and white without me ever saying black and white. Right, so there's some connection there. Whether it actually looks like this exact film is unclear, but the fact that it's black and white, and I never used the words black and white, gives me some hope there. And then here's another example. This one gave 2 images that have a bit of a sepia tone and a little bit of color, but this one here is the Ilford Delta 100 film, and also it's supposed to be black and white, so it got sort of in the right direction without me ever having to use the word black and white. Now, if I really wanted it to be black and white, of course, I would say black and white. Or if I was really going for an Ansel Adams look in a landscape photography, or in a landscape photograph, I would probably say, alpine landscape in the style of Ansel Adams. Very famous landscape photographer, shot black and white, did a lot of California landscapes, Yosemite, High Sierra, that sort of thing. And if you have a specific artist you're trying to capture, or that style that you're trying to capture, calling back to that lecture we had a couple videos ago, using the name of the artist makes a pretty significant difference. And here's what I ended up with. 4 black and white images, alpine landscape, right? It was very broad, the actual prompt, but it does look like an Ansel Adams image. And that's it for this video. So if you're going for a very specific photographic look, using the name of a film can make a big difference. And it appears that really the more popular films have a bigger impact, or a more correct impact. If there's a bunch of images that have been shot on Velvia and Portra on the internet, it's more likely that the model will understand Velvia and Portra. This will be a super quick one. I want to talk about creating corporate-y looking illustrations, like some of the stuff that you see here, maybe not this one, or what you see here, or further down, something like this. Kind of in the 2020s, maybe late 2010s, very popular flat design style. I think some people call it corporate Memphis design. So there's certain words you can try to use to achieve this style. In this example, I did corporate tech, generic illustration, 2 women dancing, flat design, 2D, bright colors, corporate Memphis in the style of Behance, which is a famous or a popular website for sharing illustrations and design assets that designers have created. So this is one just simple example. We could try one more. Let's say that I am creating a blog post on coding. Nah, that's too basic. Job interview. Sure. Let's do corporate tech, generic illustration of a job interview. And then I'll put maybe a computer in there, flat design, 2D. What else should we do? We'll add corporate Memphis if we're going for that look. We could also do an isometric one. That's also very common. Isometric we've already looked at, but basically it's a perspective that you can use. And it's pretty popular in a lot of blog posts, illustrations, and logos and things. Anyway, corporate tech, generic illustration, job interview, computer, flat design, corporate Memphis in the style of Behance. I've also seen people try and do Slack and Dropbox, the 2 companies that famously worked with this sort of flat design style early on. I'll be back when this finishes. All right, it's coming along, and you can see we're getting a very generic tech illustration. I have been guilty of using a lot of this sort of stuff in some of my course images in the years past, and it looks right on brand. And there we go. Of course, you could pick one, generate variations. Nothing revolutionary, but just some of the keywords that can help you get this style. Things like flat design, 2D, corporate Memphis, in the style of Behance, different tech companies, that can all make a difference. And just as a quick comparison, this is what it looks like if I just say corporate tech, generic illustration of a job interview with a computer. if I don't include flat design, 2D, corporate Memphis, in the style of Behance, Slack, all that stuff, we get an illustration, but it's not at all that same style. Now, a lot of people will probably prefer this style, but this doesn't work well for, a slide or a thumbnail on something or a blog post header. We want that simpler look that we got up here. And this is more of a, traditional illustration that takes a lot more work to make than what you see here, at least in my experience. This is easier to create. So just a quick comparison. That's how you can create some of those, I don't even know if they're trendy anymore, but those very popular tech illustrations. One of the biggest limitations of Midjourney, probably the biggest issue it has, is that it's just terrible at generating any sort of text. And it's not really surprising, and it's kind of always been that way, although earlier versions were surprisingly a little bit better at working with text than more recent versions. But still, if you're trying to get a specific word to show up, the name of your company in a logo, it's really, really hard. You might need to re-roll and create variations thousands of times. It is not really a feasible thing to do. So what's generally a better approach is to ask the model to not include any text specifically, and then add your text in afterwards with some post-production using, Photoshop or even Canva or whatever tool you want to use. So that's my advice. That's pretty much the standard advice. There are people who will claim they can generate text with Midjourney, and people have done it, but it requires lots of effort and time and also expense, right? Because you're paying for, unless you pay for unlimited slow generations, or relaxed generations, you'll run out of credits if you try and do, thousands of images over and over and over. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. Bookshop logo, 2D, bright colors. I mean, maybe this one works if our bookshop starts with the letter B, but here we've got Boschost, and then here we have Brobipitch, something like that. Neither of those are what I want, but maybe I like one of these. It won't really work to get the exact same image back, but maybe I'm happy with the direction it's going in, but I don't want text. So I can say -- no, text, words. Let's just go with that. Now, this is still not foolproof. We will likely still end up with some that have some text in them and some words. And I think it has to do with anytime you use the word logo, most logos have words. And so we're introducing the concept of words in the prompt. Even though I'm trying to tell it no text and words, it's just not going to always outweigh the fact that the word logo is in there. And that kind of intrinsically means include text. All right, so I ran this a bunch of times with some different variations. I tried no text, comma words, so -- no text words, and every single example has words in it. Or I don't know if I would call that words. It has text in it. I tried again, no text, no words. 3 of the 4 have text and words. I tried no text. All 4 have words. So it's not working great. What I did find to work a little bit better, surprisingly, is to do -- no letters. And letters maybe is more specific. 3 of the 4 in this panel or in this grid do not have text. Then I've got this one. Same thing. I use the same prompt, -- no letters. 3 of the 4 have no letters. So I ran this like 5 or 6 times, and it seemed like using no letters tended to work better. Certainly better than using no words or no text, where I was getting words and text in almost every example. And again, I think this has a lot to do with me introducing the word logo, which has a lot of text-heavy meaning already encoded in that word. So if you're trying to make a logo, and we'll have a separate video on this, it's often helpful to actually not use the word logo, but instead describe what the logo looks like, but not say that it's a logo, because you'll probably end up with text. So now, I could take one of these, generate variations, and add text on top of it, although these aren't really great logos in my opinion. I guess they technically are fine, but I would keep generating and get variations until I'm happy with something.